Hello and welcome to our lesson 3. We are moving on into the Sermon on the Mount. Hope that you are getting a feel for the Sermon on the Mount because it is a beautiful discourse or sermon, as they call it. The lesson title this week is Nip It in the Bud. Sounds like Barney Fife, Nip It in the Bud. Matthew chapter 5, 17 through 32. We've moved on from the Beatitudes. Now we're getting into the different topics that Jesus spoke to within the actual sermon itself. And there's like 20 different topics in this sermon. Man, can you imagine if your pastor stood up on Sunday morning and spoke about 20 different topics? You would probably miss lunch and he'd probably hear about it. But Jesus, on the side of the hill, he could get away with it because he was Jesus and we're not. So the main idea is the grace Jesus offers leads to a transformed life, resulting in an obedience from the heart. And Jesus kind of gets into this thing where, you know, adultery is like an outward um, sin. It's something that, it's not something in your mind. But Jesus is like, even if you lust in your heart, in your mind, then it's a sin. It's kind of the same thing in God's eyes. And so you want to control what happens on the outside, control what happens on the inside. And so that's interesting. I like the study aim. It said sins of the flesh usually begin as temptations of the mind. That's true. We must protect our mind, resisting temptation before it has an opportunity to produce evil actions. I got to tell you, I think more than any other time, we are faced with temptations because of social media, the internet. I mean, everything is just right there at your fingertips. And we're being influenced in so many different ways because of mass communication that this is a real problem for believers. I wanted to today introduce a couple of things that Jesus says, and maybe give you a little bit of background as we begin. Um, First thing, he talks about the law and the prophets. He said, "I didn't come to abolish those things. Came to fulfill those things." And he says, these things are important. I'm not going to just take all those teachings of Moses that God gave Moses and just do away with it. I'm going to fulfill it. And the point is, nobody else really could but Jesus, and nobody else has but him. So the law is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and it includes the Ten Commandments, all the teachings of Moses. Moses gave structure to society, structured everyday living. He spelled out God's plan for his people. And so, here you got Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Numbers, all of those powerful teaching books with lots of laws in there. So the prophets are the prophets of the Old Testament. And basically, they came to God's people and said, God is not happy with the way you're living. You're breaking the law. You're not living up to God's standards. And so he's talking about the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and the major prophets and the minor prophets. And there's lots of teaching in there about God's will and God's purposes for people and how Israel was failing. So I didn't come to abolish that. He goes on later and he talks about the scribes and the Pharisees. And he says, your example's got to be better than theirs because their public example was terrible. They were only in it for themselves. They only did it for looks. Now let's define these two groups. The scribes were people, religious men who sat and copied the Old Testament. And because that's what they did with their life every day, they became pretty good at knowing the Old Testament. And they were a group that would question Jesus. The scribes and the Pharisees would show up. They were like attorneys or lawyers. They knew their Old Testament. And so they would come and question Jesus about different things. Now, here he's the author, and they're questioning him. So the gall of it just kind of rubs you the wrong way. I think it did Jesus too. But they thought because they knew so much, they were so educated that they could question Jesus. And they found out real quick that he was very good at putting them in their place. The Pharisees is a religious group, okay? Uh, there were lots of religious groups floating around Jerusalem in Jesus' day. The Sadducees were left leaning, did not believe in the resurrection kind of religious leaders. You would think that's kind of weird being, God's people. But they were left leaning. They decided, hey, we're going to get along with the Romans. We're not kicking them out. We're not strong enough to do that. So let's just figure out how to make things work with them. They're left leaning, politically minded. The Pharisees were right leaning, religious uh, people. Uh, they were more concerned about the fact that the people in the exile in the Old Testament ended up there because they didn't keep the law, and they were Orthodox. Okay, they studied the scriptures, they went to temple, they did their thing. They did not like the Romans. Okay, and so they're more right leaning, kind of snooty a little bit. They did all the tithes, they did all their stuff. They wore the big poobah hats around, and um, you know, so Jesus is going to say, listen, your faith's got to be better than that. Your example's got to be better than that. So let's get into it. Got a lot of verses today. Wow, I'm using lots of time this morning. Um, First, I'm going to look at how Jesus said the law is important. He only came to fulfill it, 17 through 20. And then the second passage is 21 through 26, where he says, kind of be at peace with everybody. Don't be at war. If you've got a problem, try to settle it. And then last 27 through 32, where he talks about inward things and outward things. So let's look at it. Pretty simple, really, to understand. There's a few things in here that I don't think I understand, but I'm working on it. Do not think that I came to abolish the law of the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill, and we know that he did. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth shall pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. It's not going to go away. The law is going to be here forever till God winds down history. Whoever then annuls one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. See, these are still God's laws. But whoever keeps and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus talks a lot about the kingdom of heaven, a whole nother topic. For I say to you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, they were the ones that should have known the teachings of the law and the prophets. You can know something and be terrible at it. And they certainly did not. They may have kept the letter of the law, but they didn't keep the intent of the law. Okay? And so Jesus says, no. I didn't come to throw it out. I came to fulfill it. What it teaches is still important, and I'm not going to change that. But just make sure your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees. It's got to be better than that. They were religious people, but they weren't very godly. I mean, if they were godly, they should have recognized who Jesus was, and they didn't. And so Jesus, let me tell you what, his strongest words are for the religious people, these scribes and Pharisees. Now, You start reading, this is the beginning of the book of Matthew, his words get stronger. He calls them snakes and vipers, hypocrites. I mean, he goes to them and lets them have it, and they were due every bit of it. Let's look at the second passage where he talks about being at peace with all people. You've heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. He uses a lot of court terms here. There was a court. That our court system is based on their court system. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says of his brother, you good for nothing, you shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, which is the Lord. And whoever says you fool shall be guilty enough to go to the into fiery hell. Now, see, Jesus did talk about hell. We don't like it. I don't like it, but he did. What he's getting into this thing about you may not have gone and murdered your brother, but if you say terrible things to him, you are good for nothing. You're just as guilty in the eyes of God. So he's kind of getting into this thing where what's on the inside of you and what you say is just as hurtful and sinful in the eyes of God as actually doing something terrible. Therefore, if you're presenting your offering at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, then come and present your offering. Now, it's a very important New Testament thing. Now, the words are like if your brother has something against you, not, you know, he's, maybe you caused something that makes your brother against you. But I think it goes the other way too. If you have something against your brother, it's like you're not right with God if you're not right with other people, especially those closest to you. So go and reconcile that, then come back and give your offering. Okay, then come back and worship. It's kind of like taking the Lord's Supper. We should pray and confess and make things right before we take the Lord's Supper. A whole nother thing, but the same principle. So go and be reconciled to your brother, then come back. Let's keep reading. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you are with him on the way. So it's like you're on the way to court. Try to work this out before you get there because it may not go in your favor. So that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge. Like if you're found guilty, he's going to turn you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you will be thrown into prison. You see this kind of chain of command going on here? Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid up the last cent. It's like, settle this thing before it goes to court. Be at peace with everybody. Do the right thing. Be a good witness. So he's talking about intent and being reconciled to people. As it goes with you, be at peace with all men. I'm going to say that again. But see, these are two different topics. The first one he talks about, the law. The law is going to be filled. Now he's talking about your relationship to other people. So, boy, he's hitting all kinds of issues here. He's going to do a third one in this lesson. And this one is, to me, is the more difficult one. Here we go. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. That's in the law. Okay, it's in the Ten Commandments. Okay, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Isn't that interesting? So there's physical adultery and there's mental adultery. They're both adultery in the eyes of God. If your right hand makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. See, it's hyperbole. He's like, if that eye sees something that you shouldn't be seeing that makes you think something you shouldn't think, then you need to do away with it. What he's saying is deal with your sin. Okay, for it's better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Now, this is the second time he's talked about hell. Jesus did talk about hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, throw it off. cut it off and throw it from you, for it's better for you to lose one of your parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, it's interesting how your hand can make you stumble. Not sure what that's about. Stumbling is something you do with your legs, not your hands. But the point is pretty clear. Deal with it. Don't put yourself in the place of temptation. Be proactive. Those kinds of things. Here's the last paragraph. Now, to me, this is a very controversial passage, and I don't quite know how to interpret it. Maybe Wesley will Wednesday night in the adult workers meeting give me some insight, but I don't have it today. It was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Now, men had all the authority. Women didn't have any rights. So a man could send you away just because he didn't like the way you cooked. Or you could just do anything, and he could send you away with a certificate of divorce, which we know is never God's plan. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, like she's been unfaithful to you, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commit adultery. Now, I got to say up quick, when you ask for forgiveness of a sin, God casts it as far as the east is from the west, and it goes away. But this whole situation here is terrible because it's like the woman could have nothing to do with it. She could have been completely faithful, but if the husband divorced her for whatever his reason would be, he could divorce her. And what Jesus is saying here is that she would commit adultery if she got remarried, and the person who married her could be committing adultery, which seems kind of strict and hard for someone who could have been innocent. That she's not the guilty person, she could be the innocent person. I think what's going on here is Jesus is saying, listen, honor your marriage, preserve your marriage. Uh, when you make a vow, keep it, work through it, do whatever you got to do to make it work. I think that's true. Now, if some old guy's beating up on a woman, and he's abusing her, I'm not going to say to her, "Oh, you've got to stay here because you made a vow," or he's about this close to killing you. Um, I don't think that's God's will either. I think that what Jesus is doing here, he's saying marriage is a holy thing, and you made a vow to each other. Keep it, work through it, both of you. Now, I got to tell you, it takes two to tango. One of them can want to make it work, but if the other person doesn't want to make it work, guess what? It's not. It's not. And so, what do you do about that? It's terrible. So, you know, counsel a lot of people in my ministry over the years, and people come to me for advice, for counseling. I always try to say to them, one day you're going to have to look in the eyes of your grown children who have been hurt by this divorce and say to them, I did everything that I could to make it work. I think we need to be able to say that to the Lord. And I think that's the point, is both people have to try to make it work. They have to pull together. You may not feel like it. You may not like that person today, but at one time you did. Now their culture was different. They had arranged marriages and stuff like that. But you got to try to make it work. You can't just send them off, divorce them for whatever reason because you're not happy today, because there's consequences for everybody and not just you. So, interesting lesson, isn't it? Let's pray together. We'll meet again next week. Let's pray. Jesus, we love you. We love each other. I thank you for these teachings of Jesus. I pray you bless them. I pray that we would take seriously your word, take seriously our relationship to other people, and take serious our relationship to you. And so, Lord, Bless us like only you can. We love you and we trust you. In your name I pray. Amen. You know what I did? I did not give the truths. Let me give those to you very quickly. The first one is Jesus didn't abolish the law, he fulfilled it. We've said that. Second one, as far as it goes with you, be at peace with all men. We've said that. And the last one is the Lord um, cares about what you think as much as what you do. And so let's protect both. Take care. Have a great week.